Saw a lot of variations of them, such as cowboy versions, fish versions, artist Morty, robot versions, Cronenberg versions, blue shirt Morty, whom, as you can guess, was wearing a blue shirt instead of the standard yellow, while his Rick wears yellow shirt instead of blue. We can also see long-sleeved Morty, lawyer Morty, and others. But 3, well, technically 4, are probably the most interesting versions of Morty, who made their debut in that episode, and 2 of them were Dipper and Mabel Mortys. The Dipper and Mabel Mortys are alternate versions of Morty Smith, modeled after the characters Dipper and Mabel Pines from the show Gravity Falls, voiced by Kristen Schaal and Jason Ritter. In the same episode, many Mortys are killed when the Citadel of Rix is transported into a prison of the Galactic Federation. It is unknown if Dipper and Mabel Mortys are some of the Mortys who died. The 2 Mortys are dressed up as the 2 main protagonists of the show, Gravity Falls, where Dipper Morty has the same hat and Mabel Morty has a yellow skirt and hair tied back with a comb. This is not the first reference to Gravity Falls, as both creators have played around with their show's connection before through the pen, pad, and mug going through the portal in close Rick encounters of the Rick kind. It is unknown if the Rick next to both of them is supposed to represent the twins' great uncle, Grunkle Stan, or just a random Rick. Anyway, I plan on doing a separate video about the connections between Gravity Falls and Rick and Morty, so stay tuned for that. Another interesting character that was introduced in that episode was Morty Rick. This character is either a Rick, a Morty, or a combination of both. He appeared in the episode The Rick Shank Redemption in the background at the Citadel of Rix. In the same episode, many Mortys are killed when the Citadel of Rix is transported into a prison of the Galactic Federation. It is unknown if Morty Rick is one of the Mortys who died. Morty Rick wears Morty's clothes with Rick's lab coat. He shares his head shape and facial structure with Morty, while his hairstyle and physique, along with his hair and skin colors, are shared with Rick. His existence has led to a minor fan theory that all Mortys are the larval forms of the Rick species, citing that Morty Rick appears to resemble a missing link or nymph form between both species. This theory is supported by Tiny Rick's hair color and body proportions are almost identical to Morty's, given the complete absence of any explicitly fully grown Morty incarnation in the multiverse and the fact that this Rick doesn't have his own designated Morty partner. He is one of the most intriguing characters to me, which is why the 3rd ever video on this channel was about him. The official Rick and Morty game, The Rick Shank Redemption, identifies him as Scientist Morty. In the game Pocket Mortys, we are introduced to a character named Rick Morty, which, as you might have guessed, is a combination of Rick and Morty. The game description says this Morty was tired of always being told he was an idiot and would never have even half the brain power that his Rick possessed. I like the concept of a character who is literally a combination of the 2 main characters, and I am kinda upset that we never got to see him, but we are getting at least 3 more seasons. So let's hope that we will see the character sooner or later. Interestingly enough, in Pocket Mortys, we are introduced to Old Morty, who has the same hair color as Rick. I wonder if this is true for all Mortys and if their hair color changes from brown to blue like their grandfathers, or if it's just the case for a handful of them. Anyway, I really hope that Scientist Morty survived Evil Morty's attack on the Citadel and is still alive. Speaking of Evil Morty, another character who was introduced in that episode was him. He is the Morty who in most cases steals the screen time every time when he appears. He's the most popular character from the series besides Rick C-137 and Morty Prime. Every single episode where he has appeared has at least 9.3 ratings on IMDb, with the highest being 9.8, which is one of the highest rated episodes of any show. This speaks a lot to how important he is as a character for the show, and he never disappoints. According to the show's creators, he will surely return, but we don't know when and why. I assume he will make his comeback in Season 7. Because of Justin Roiland's recent allegations, even though Adult Swim has already fired him, a lot of people are boycotting the show, and what's a better way to bring back the hype than bringing back the most popular character of the show? I have made a separate video talking about his past and his return. The links to those videos will be in the description, and I recommend you all check it out if you haven't already. If we are talking about Evil Morty, we shouldn't forget Campaign Manager Morty. In the Ricklantis mix-up, Evil Morty secretly develops an alter ego to become the presidential candidate for an election for the newly democratic Citadel. The campaign manager, Morty, is in charge of a candidate from the Morty Party, though he does not take his own candidate seriously at first. But despite mockery from Ricks and even other Mortys, his candidate, who is actually Evil Morty in disguise, makes a rousing speech about the class divide between the various Ricks and Mortys on the Citadel during a debate, which earns him lots of praise and support. Survived the assassination attempt and won the election. As he is dropped into the airlock to be put to death for his crime by Rick's Secret Service agents, they reveal his attempt has failed and Evil Morty has won the election. Campaign manager Morty then desperately tries to expose Evil Morty's files to them, only to be ignored and executed via ejected projection into space. His body is one of the many bodies floating out of the Citadel's airlocks in the aftermath of the new dictatorship's purge. Also among the dead was investigator Rick, who was possibly killed for his involvement in uncovering Evil Morty's secret. It is interesting how this Morty seems to be the only one who knew who Evil Morty was before he revealed his true self. It is possible, but unlikely, that Evil Morty was controlling investigator Rick as he did with Evil Rick. This may have been because Evil Morty knew that if his former campaign manager learned the truth, he would try to assassinate him in front of a large crowd of supporters, which would earn him sympathy votes. If we're talking about the Ricklantis mix-up episode, we shouldn't forget Cop Morty. Cop Morty was Cop Rick's partner. Cop Morty had another Rick partner, which is implied to have been killed by a Morty. He is very volatile, putting a gun in Morty's mouth for calling him a sidekick. Despite being very hostile, Cop Morty does show compassion when Cop Rick is stabbed by a Morty. He shows no mercy, killing Mortys who are already arrested. He was already revealed to be taking money from Big Morty by killing rival Morty gangs. He is killed by Cop Rick after attempting to shoot him. A lot more versions of Mortys have also been introduced in that episode, but I don't think they were interesting enough to mention in this video. Fortunately for us, a lot of them were introduced in the Rick and Morty comics, and I want to talk about Dictator Morty, who is probably the most popular version of the comics. Morty 304X, also known as Dictator Morty, was one of the main villains of the Rick and Morty comics. Several years ago, Beth brought Morty and Summer to the Dimension 304X by using his grandfather Rick's portal gun. Their Rick had destroyed their world, so they had to escape him. When they entered their new world, Morty became a scientific genius, but instead he used it for personal purposes, such as his obsession with ridding the multiverse of Ricks. At some point, he decided to seize power as a dictator and never let it go, allowing it to corrupt him and drive him crazy. He created tools to look through realities, but was not able to travel there himself due to the low battery on the portal gun. This meant he had to find someone else who could travel between dimensions. Rick Sanchez from Dimension C-132. Morty set his scientists out to create a monster to kill all Ricks in all dimensions, but this drove him to a fight with Summer and forced Morty to leave him and Beth. This is a very interesting version of Morty. This shows us who Morty would become if there was no Rick in his life. Evil Morty is almost the same character as him. They were both dictators who would do everything in their power to oppose Rick. They both managed to escape their grandfather and their influence, but the main difference between them was that Dictator Morty was full of vengeance. He wanted all the Ricks to die, and that's why he wanted to get an interdimensional portal, while Evil Morty simply wanted to live without Rick, to be fully free of him, and as we know, in the end, he was successful in that. We have a somewhat good impression of what happened to Dictator Morty's Rick. He seems to have become extremely evil, which made even his daughter, Beth, who always tried her best to be with his father and yet his praise, leave him. But we know nothing about Evil Morty's Rick, and I hope someday we will hear more about him. On the other hand, Dictator Morty wasn't the only Morty who shared a lot of similarities with Evil Morty. Another Morty who seems extremely interesting from the comics is Morty Smith, C594, the main character of the Pocket Line You Stole It miniseries. Morty Smith, C594, and Morty lie in a pit as the words "The Agony of Freedom Day 14" appear. C594 awakens and leaves the pit in order to find food and water for the dying Morty. Upon leaving the pit, C594 runs through the forest and, upon seeing prepackaged snacks hanging off of a tree, leaps up for them and is shot with a Morty manipulator chip by Rick Sanchez version C594, wearing a hunting uniform. Rick proceeds to drag C594 along the ground in a mesh net, berating him for his idiocy in having fallen for such a trap. C594 attempts to explain that he was merely trying to find food for Morty, but realizes that Rick would capture him if he revealed his presence and decides against it. Elsewhere, Morty dies. Rick brings C594 back to his bunker, in which he keeps his pocket Mortys. It is revealed in the dialogue that C594 is this Rick's Morty, who has been consistently running away due to his being unable to win a Morty battle. While Rick proceeds to attempt opening a sphere containing a miniature Morty, C594 chews through the net and escapes. As C594 flees, he realizes that his Morty manipulator chip, which had been shocking him, is loose and removes it. C594 dashes away from Rick around a corner and into a closet where he encounters Ants in My Eyes Morty, who has additionally been attempting to escape. The two run down the hall where Rick spots them and walks away. C594 assumes that he has gone to take a poop and returns with Ants in My Eyes Morty to Rick's Zobliette in order to free the Pocket Mortys. Rick arrives holding a shotgun and asks Ants in My Eyes Morty to climb into a cage, which he does while giving C594 permission to run away. Rick then tells C594 that he can take the Pocket Mortys with him. C594 removes Ants in My Eyes Morty's Morty manipulator chip, causing him to bleed to death. The Pocket Mortys present assume that C594 must be an evil Morty, but a tearful C594 refutes that he is not, pointing out a caged, perhaps evil Morty as proof. Holding Rick at gunpoint, C594 christens himself Plain Morty until he can find something he's good at. Escaping the bunker and subsequently sprinting through the woods, Plain Morty vows to find somewhere he can go where he can just be Morty and find myself, as he comes across a group of lazing Mortys. This comics is the only one where Evil Morty is mentioned. I really enjoyed reading this, and I think he is interesting enough to make a separate video about him, so stay tuned for that. If we're talking about comic book versions of Morty, we shouldn't forget Morty C-132, who is one of the main two protagonists alongside Rick of the first two volumes of the Rick and Morty comic book series. The Morty Smith who lives in Dimension C-132 is shown to admire and care for his grandfather Rick, maybe even to a greater extent than his Prime counterpart, and is always considerate about their adventures together rather than complaining. He mainly just follows orders from his grandfather, Rick. Morty C-132, while similar to Morty Prime, did have minor differences in history and character. While the mainstream Morty had a Gazorpian son born from an alien sex robot in raising Gazorpazorp, this Morty never conceived a son, simply making him Morty Smith in contrast to his Prime counterpart, who is called Morty Smith Sr. Morty C-132, previously knew Scary Terry even before issue 5. This must have been reflected in the second episode of the show, in which, in most cases, a similar event took place and Morty kept an obvious memory of him. In issue 3, Morty was assumed by his father, Jerry, to be blaming himself for Rick being left behind in the maze. This is fairly different from Morty Smith Prime, considering he never blamed himself for his grandfather Rick's disappearance 14 years ago. This Morty also knew about the existence of other Ricks and Mortys prior to issue number 5. He was a very cool character, however, he is no longer a main Morty from the comics. In the 14th chapter of the comics, it was revealed that Rick C-137 was showing his Morty things that have happened in another timeline with another Rick and Morty in the head of another Rick and Morty from another timeline. Another Morty who seems to be very unique among them is Genius Morty. At the end of the 3rd chapter of Rick and Morty comics, something very interesting happens. We are introduced to a super smart version of Morty who is called Genius Morty. He was an extremely smart teenager living at home with his alcoholic idiot grandfather Rick, whom he could constantly make fun of for being less intelligent. He was smart enough to be a part of the Council of Mortys, with whom he was on good terms. One day, he woke his Rick up from a dream where their levels of intelligence were switched. Morty mocked this idea before telling him to join him in the garage and complaining about how slow he was once he got there. He told Rick to hand him a screwdriver before continuing to mock the idea of a brilliant scientist Rick, which led Rick to get rid of him. That accident was witnessed by Rick and Morty from Dimension C-132. Unfortunately, I can't show you that scene because of YouTube's policies, but trust me, it was pretty brutal. This 4-page long scene was very interesting for numerous reasons. First, we are introduced to a whole new universe, which is exactly the opposite of the central finite curve. In that universe, Rick is Morty and Morty is Rick. Secondly, a portal that has been used by Rick C-132 was different than anything we have seen. It was purple instead of the usual green. The fact that they used a different portal than the usual green one, and also how the entire universe is constructed making Morty the Rick of it, makes me think that such a universe obviously exists outside of the central finite curve. I think it would be somewhat interesting if Evil Morty went to that dimension and tried gathering all the smart Mortys against Ricks, but when you think about it, it doesn't really make sense for him to do that since he has already destroyed all the Ricks and the whole central finite curve in general. But on the other hand, he failed to destroy the most influential Ricks, which include Rick C-137, Rick Prime, and a couple of other supposedly influential Ricks from a red string conspiracy board of numerous Ricks around a tapestry of what would become the Citadel of Rick's insignia. And who knows, maybe this is where Evil Morty went, and maybe the show will introduce this superior Morty. So far, every single Morty that we have discussed from the comics was strong to some extent. However, the same cannot be said about Bald Morty, who worked for Fancy Rick at his Rick salon located in the Citadel. As a hairdresser, he was tasked with collecting Morty's hair for Fancy Rick's experiments. One day, while servicing a customer, Morty, the customer's phone fell out of his pocket and Bald Morty sneakily picked it up. He used the phone to look at a photo of Jessica in the back room while talking to Fancy Rick about his experiment. Though called Project RM10X76, Bald Morty named it Barbara Streisand. This angered Fancy Rick, who had followed Bald Morty into the back room and scolded him for his behavior. A large tentacle extended out of the tank containing the experiment, grabbed Morty and pulled him down into the tank. Rick stated that it would be Morty's punishment for crossing him. Now I think I have covered every interesting version of Morty from the comics, and now it is time for Pocket Mortys. This is the official Rick and Morty game that introduced 406 Mortys. If I started reviewing every single one of them, this video would never end, but I chose the most interesting ones, and the first one I want to talk about is the one true Morty. What sets this Morty apart from every other Morty is his appearance. He sports a distinctive mohawk, golden eyes, a white robe, and a bionic left arm, also painted gold. His bionic left hand appears in an obscene gesture. The shell of Egg Morty serves as a necklace. The one true Morty is a Morty who is seen as the god of Mortyism. He is taught about in a book called The Good Morty and is portrayed as a god who will lead Mortys to stop following their Ricks and being independent, choosing the path of the one true Morty, leading them to a rewarding eternity in the Morty Afterlife Zone. In close Rick counters of the Rick kind, a group of Mortys were being held in Evil Rick's torture chamber and had formed a cult where they had read The Good Morty and believed that someday the one true Morty will come and set them free of of the torture chamber and relieve them of their sufferings, thus creating a religious formation. When Morty Smith from the Cronenberg dimension arrived, they believed him to be the one true Morty. Despite the fact that Morty looked nothing like the one depicted in the book, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not the one true Morty. He followed through with exactly what the book said by freeing all the locked up Mortys and overthrowing evil Rick. A drawback, however, to this is in Pocket Mortys, where the dimension he originates from is not the Cronenberg dimension. It seems the one true Morty really exists because according to the description of the Grand Sage Morty, that Morty was touched by the golden hand of the one true Morty and must now spread his love everywhere. Praise the one true Morty. It seems Morty Prime wasn't the real one true Morty. Also, according to Pocket Mortys, the one true Morty is from dimension C586. I am fully expecting him to make his debut in the series, and I think it is only a matter of time until we see him. Anyway, the whole concept of Mortyism seems very interesting to me, and I plan to do a separate video about it, so make sure to hit the notification button for it. He wasn't the only interesting Morty that was introduced in the game. The next one on our list is Animatronic Morty. Its description says this Morty is one of the last original Morty bots left from the uprising that's still functioning. It's impossible to say how many innocent lives he took that day. If you look at this Morty, does he remind you of any other version of Morty that we have seen? Look closely and take your time. Yes, he was first seen in the season 1 of the Rick and Morty opening. In that scene, Jerry is helping Morty with his homework, and then his face falls off, revealing him to be a robot. Morty is seen coming into the room in the background, and Rick stops him and takes him the other way. Original opening only scenes always intrigued me, and I'm very happy that we finally got some information about him. Another interesting version of Morty who was introduced in the game was Badass Suit Morty. This Morty had literally the same armor as Jerry's. In the 8th episode of the 6th season, Jerry is approached to join an intergalactic council of heroes, the centerpiece of which is a sticky orb of power. Unsure of what to do with the orb, Jerry recruits Rick's help, and the latter reluctantly builds an exosuit that harnesses the orb's powers. I wonder if this Morty got his suit power from the Intergalactic Council of Heroes, and if he did, what did he do that made them give him an orb? Do you all remember Pickle Rick? Alongside with Evil Morty, he is considered one of the most popular characters from the show, and not surprising for anyone, Morty also got his pickle version in this game. I wonder how he ended up as Pickle Morty and what the reason was. Maybe he is from a universe where everyone is a pickle, just like in the pizza or phone universes. Just like Pickle Morty, I wonder about Bird Person Morty. His description says that this Morty is looking for someone to form a soul bond with, and he set his eyes on you. Who's a pretty birdie? I wonder if this Morty has a Bird Person version of Rick too, and what that universe's Bird Person looks like. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned Dipper and Mabel Mortys. Interestingly enough, Mabel Morty appears in Pocket Mortys as Girl Morty. She is the second known female Morty since Morticia. Just like Mabel Morty, Morticia has also made her debut. She was briefly shown in the final episode of the 5th season in Rick's flashback. You would think that since Morty is female in that universe, everyone's gender would be changed, but it seems it was only about Morty. I wonder why Rick went to that dimension and how that dimension was connected to Rick's search for Rick Prime. Hope we'll someday hear more about Rick's quest to find his Prime counterpart. In that game, Archmage Morty is also introduced. The game's description says that this Morty's ability to tap into arcane forces is almost matched by his sheer ignorance of arcane forces. Wizards have existed in the Rick and Morty universe, and the first time we saw one of them was in the 4th episode of the 4th season. He is extremely overpowered, even if his abilities only work within the boundaries of his magical realm, not to mention having a literal horde of dragons at his beck and call. Unfortunately, the wizard is burned alive by the very dragons he had been shaming for countless years. His final act of magic merely prolongs his suffering. I wonder how strong this version of Morty is and what his relationship to science is. Interestingly enough, in that game, Wizard Morty is also introduced, and I wonder what the difference is between them and if they know of each other's existence. Let's not forget one of the best character designs that has been introduced in the series, in my opinion, and that character is Concerto, a minor, one-time villain who only appeared in the ending credits of Pickle Rick, as well as in the theme song for Season 3. He is a music-related villain who attempted to crush Rick and Morty with the hammers on a giant piano. He was killed by Jaguar before he could do any harm to Rick and Morty. He also killed 3 other people. He has piano teeth and piano hammer elbows. In the game, the Concerto version of Morty has been revealed. According to his description, this Morty is a mortified version of Concerto who appears for only a few seconds before being killed. Concerto had one of the best designs, and if his Morty counterpart won't make a debut in the series, I hope we'll see him at least once. Also, do you guys remember the intro of Morty's Mind Blowers? That episode starts off with Rick and Morty on the run from a strange humanoid creature set in a world similar to M.C. Escher's painting Relativity, in which there are stairs all over the place and the rules. Morty looks at the truth tortoise despite Rick's warnings and causes Morty to drop the creature in a void. The place collapses, but not before the duo escapes. I don't know about you, but this scene has always seemed very interesting to me, and I think Forbidden Morty might be somehow connected to it. According to the description, this Morty has found the locked, forbidden text that his Rick keeps hidden in the attic. If he found the key, we would all be in trouble. I wonder what kinds of text he could find that even Rick keeps hidden in the attic. His design is also extremely different compared to other Mortys. I mean, he literally looks like a ghost. I wonder if we'll someday hear more about him because his design and description look very intriguing. Beside cool-looking characters, this game introduced one of the strongest versions of Morty, Black Hole Morty. According to his description, this Morty is full of wonders that are waiting just beyond the event horizon to be exposed from the darkness that hides them. I really wonder how strong he is and if he'll ever appear in the series. This concept looks very interesting, but I feel like even if he appeared, we wouldn't be learning much about him since we don't know a lot of things about black holes in our universes either. And my favorite Mortys from the game are the evil rabbit Morty, the dangerous Morty, the violent Morty, and the loner Morty. I think it is obvious that they are based on Tyler Durden, Donnie Darko, Alex DeLarge, and Travis Bickle. I was very surprised and happy to see this version of him since they are some of my favorite movies ever, especially Taxi Driver. Tyler Durden's version of Morty's description says that this Morty runs a small business and spends most of his time traveling the country. The way he sees it, only through total failure lies the true path to success. Donnie Darko's version says this Morty is an evil cosplayer from a dimension where Halloween is 340 days long. His rabbit costume used to be pink and cute, but has since faded to a dull gray from overuse. Taxi Driver's version says that this Morty spends his days in his small, dirty apartment training for that one big moment to put the world right. He enjoys going to the cinema by himself. And Alex DeLarge's version says there is Morty that is him and his old man that is Rick, and the two would traverse the old interdimensionals together until, alas, brothers, a mishap put a right end to all that tomfoolery. I was very happy to see them, and I hope to see them at some point in the series since this show really loves doing such Easter eggs. And the final Morty that I want to talk about is Morty Smith, C1.21. At the end of summer 2021, Adult Swim released a short live-action clip of Christopher Lloyd playing Rick from Rick and Morty just a couple days before the 5th season finale. Given the show's frequent reality bending and its multiverse full of Rick and Morty variants, it stood to reason that the clip was a preview of the finale, a glimpse at Rick and Morty entering a dimension that wasn't animated. Adult Swim proceeded to release 2 more live-action clips starring Lloyd before the finale aired, both about as short as the first one, referencing specific episodes and moments from the show, including, yes, a pickle. When the finale aired on Sunday night, though, it became clear that the clips had nothing to do with the show's story. They were simply made as promos for the show, built around the surefire virality of Rick Sanchez being brought to life by the beloved actor whose most famous roles inspired the character to begin with. I was kinda disappointed that it had nothing to do with the story, but I still have a little hope for a live-action version of the series. I think we covered every interesting Morty that has ever appeared in the franchise. If not, let me know which I missed in the comments. Either way, tell me which Morty is the best from the series. It was fun making this video, and I'm planning to make another one about Rick as well, so make sure to hit that notification button so you don't miss it. Lonnie Brooks out. Bye.